We have a habit of being pretty fickle when it comes to our commitment to God. There was a young man who wrote to his girlfriend and said, "Sweetheart, if I had to crawl across the hot Sahara sands, I would crawl on the burning sands on my knees to come and see you. And if I had to go through shark-infested Atlantic Ocean waters, I would swim that ocean to be with you. And if I had to cross the continent with the fiercest dragon ever, I would fight that dragon to be with you." He ended the note with, "I'll see you Thursday if it doesn't rain." We are known for being somewhat fickle in our relationship with God. It was Francis Bacon who said, "It's not what men eat, but what they digest that makes them strong. It's not what we gain, it's what we save that makes us rich. It's not what we read, but what we remember that makes us learned. It's not what we preach or pray, but what we practice that makes us Christian." I think one of the things you have to remember is that when we start talking about holiness, a lot of people get skittish about whether or not you should do stuff. I want to do something that's going to take me just a few minutes to kind of run through, and we're going to do a little bit of Bible marking, but it should help you to sort of nail down something. I want to talk about identifying and isolating external disorders. I want to talk about skin, okay? And so we're going to make this very high and resounding and spiritual. We're going to talk about skin. But really, in chapters 13 and 14, you're dealing with skin issues. And part of it is, verse 2, when a man has on the skin of his body, just underline skin of his body. Underline in verse 3, a priest shall look. That's the diagnosis portion. Underline in verse 4, isolate him at the end of verse 4. That is quarantining. And it's a temporary quarantine in verse 4 for 7 days. In verse 5, seventh day, underline seventh day. That's the seventh day lookover where you tell him he gets another 7 days of quarantining if it's not all clear. And then verse 6, underline wash his clothes and be clean. I'm going somewhere with this, just kind of do some underlining and don't worry about it. I want to see if you can take a look at some laws that have to do with things like leprosy and understand why God gave you a full record of them. A couple things I want you to note. In verses 1 to 4, if I were putting something on this, I would say that the job in relationship to disease is to prevent it from spreading. So the job is to prevent it from spreading. And so one of the things that it will say is, when an issue arises, we need to make sure that we isolate the problem so it doesn't affect and harm others. By the way, that's true not only of skin, it's true of all disease, and not only that, it's true also of the spiritual aspect of dealing with people's sin. You're never going to be able to address the problem till you isolate the problem. And what happens is people usually make shortcuts and don't isolate the problem. These people are going to be living in close proximity, and communicable diseases could wipe out all of Israel. And so the priest was given the responsibility to understand, and it came at the cost to the individual, but it was not supposed to cost everyone in the community. God said that quarantining was an appropriate way to deal with sickness. We're experiencing for the first time in the news right now, current cycles of people going, my rights were violated because I was quarantined, because I was working in West Africa, I got off my flight and they put me in quarantine. We have a nurse today that had a long interview and her rights were being violated. As if we have the right to come in with the possibility of communicable disease and just get on a flight with, 100 people. And the problem is this. When this showed up, people understood that God was also at work. And as a result, they showed it to the priests and they were supposed to isolate the problem. The second thing I would tell you is verses 5 and 6. I think there's a case to be made in verses 5 and 6 that you have to properly evaluate the problem. You have to take time to evaluate the problem. 7 days were up and you had to reevaluate the spot that was a problem on the person. There are some problems that arise that need to be looked at up front, but they should be also given time to play out. Sometimes you don't know all that's wrong right away. And so the right thing to do is give it time. That's not really a good thing for our culture. Our culture is, give me a pill and I'll feel all better. Can I have a shot and that'll take it away? But the truth is that the body is fairly mysterious to us, and so sometimes what we need to do is take time. By the way, there's an old proverb. It's a very high, resounding, holy proverb. Make sure you don't use a bazooka to kill a gnat. And what it means is if you'll take the time to allow something to manifest itself, then you'll probably be able to treat it more accurately. Have you ever gotten into a situation that you thought, I'm just going to write them right now. I'm just going to call them right back right now. But you haven't given it enough time. Sometimes time is on your side when it comes to especially all things physical. It takes time to heal. Verses 7 and 8. Let me offer this. If the scab spreads further, he's talking about let the priest look at it. The thing is, here's what's important in 7 and 8. Don't sweep your problem under the rug. I think there's a very simple thing here. If you have a problem, if there is a critical issue that can affect other people, you need to go and you need to tell somebody about it. I have an unbelievable number of people in my life who have had an ongoing problem with something for a long time, and they'll come and they'll say something like this, Pastor, I've been going to tell somebody about this for 20 years. Really? Do you have any idea how that has affected and infected your Christian life? So they were told that this is going to create other issues if you don't deal with it, and actions need to be taken, and you're going to need to go see somebody about this. Now, go on to verses 9 through 11, because one of the things I would say is this. When you're trying to train a whole group of priests, they had to be aware of warning signs. One of the things that we are learning as a society is how everyone should be on guard to look for certain warning signs. I have gone to numerous seminars so that I would be able to instantly see if a child is coming from an abusive home. I don't think I can instantly see that, but I think that I know some things I didn't know before. And it is helpful because very often children don't have a way to express what's going on, and so you can lean into them with certain things and it really will get a response from them, and you can save them years of pain and frustration. Let me say it this way. Many problems are not a mystery. A lot of things are not that much of a mystery. I'm amazed at the number of people that get blindsided when they've looked the other way on a problem that was going on for a long time. If you have a problem in your relationship and you don't address it, eventually that's going to show up somewhere. And here, I think one of the things he says in verses 9, 10, and 11 is, look, you have to be aware of the warning signs, and you've got to look at them. You can't just ignore them. There's handwriting on the wall here. Let me suggest to you in verses 12 through 17, and I'm pushing you through this just because leprosy isn't the most exciting thing to spend our evening on. Body parts falling off and whatnot. I would say 12 to 17 is keep an eye for resurfacing problems. Keep an eye for resurfacing problems. There are some problems that even after you resolve them, you have to keep watching them because they'll come back up. By the way, anger is one of those. You can resolve an issue between two people as much as the two are able to resolve it. Keep an eye on that relationship. Watch out, because it's liable to be incendiary again. Bam! It blows up. In verses 18 to 44, there's a big long section here, and I'm going to say something, and you're going to look at that and we'll go, duh. In 18 to 44, this whole section is about properly identifying the problem. See, all of a sudden you've got all these priests, and all they've ever been is slaves. And this is the training manual on how to figure out what that blotchy skin is all about. But I want you to notice that how to recognize and deal with a number of different skin issues goes, in the passage, it ranges from bald to boil. I mean, this is a compendium in this many verses of why the guy's bald or why he has boil. It's got everything in it. So what he's trying to do is say, Priests, I need you guys, when he comes to you with something, to know the difference between a bald spot and a boil. Okay? To have the right answer, you have to diagnose the problem properly. I don't know how often I say it, but the right answer to the wrong question is as bad as the wrong answer to the right one. Make sure that you spend the time. This whole section, what I love about verses 18 all the way down to 44, somewhere make a note. Make sure you take the time to figure out what the problem is. It doesn't matter if it's a skin ailment or not. The biblical principle of the law is don't start flinging around laws and judgments on people till you know what happened. And then you get down to verses 45 and 46. And I want you to listen to these verses. I'm going to read them to you. As for the leper who has an infection, his clothes shall be torn, and the hair of his head shall be uncovered. He shall cover his mustache and cry, unclean, unclean. He shall remain unclean all the days during which he has the infection. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. Here's the thing. It wasn't that God really wanted him to walk around going, unclean, unclean. This wasn't like something God liked to hear. He wanted to make sure that everybody was aware by looking and by hearing. Why did he need to say unclean? What's that?
Because people are stupid.
Well, okay, maybe it's stupidity. I was going for blindness, but stupidity works. I was just thinking not everybody can see. So here's the thing. Now, if you're blind, deaf, and dumb, then stay home because you might bump into a leper, okay? I don't know what else to tell you. But the thing is that the person who's out there is saying unclean and then looking the part. But you know what? Nobody's going to want to do that. Are you going to want to do that? What would you choose to do if you were that person? Go to the edge of the camp and stay there. And during the time that you're going through the washings and things that you're supposed to do that the priest has told you to do, get alone, get with God, and take time to reflect. In other words, use this circumstance as a learning tool and a time with God. I, some years ago, broke this ankle in 3 places and had a hardware store put in my left leg. And right away, I found myself with some extra time on my hands. I canceled out all my international trips for the next 8 months. I did find that after a couple of months, there was the opportunity to spend a little time to reflect, to pray, to think through some issues, to journal some things in a way that I hadn't ever found in my life the time to do. So one of the things I would say is maybe time to reflect on how the infection happened to begin with. Maybe some reflection on the choices that were made or some parts of your health that were neglected. Maybe some of those things could happen there. And so chapter 13 really is about that. I'm not trying to spiritualize it. I'm simply trying to say to you that the principles involved in the law operate even though the law isn't yours. Jesus said, you heard me say this. What I meant was this. What's the principle behind it? So I see a lot of principles on just learning to pay attention to what's going on in your life and to diagnose it properly and taking some time. Go to chapter 14, and there's another kind of, it's another continuation of this same idea. We're still dealing with skins and surfaces. I want you to circle a few things in your text. Just don't worry about it. Circle or underline the following things, okay? Go down to verse 10. Underline grain offering. Go down to verse 12, guilt offering and wave offering. What's a wave offering? It's when you take the guilt offering and wave it around. It's not an offering. It's something you do to one of the other offerings. It's not a technical offering. It's something you're doing, okay? In verse 13, underline burnt offering, guilt offering, sin offering. Verse 14, guilt offering. The end of 17, guilt offering. 19, sin offering, burnt offering. 20, burnt offering, grain offering. I'm going somewhere with this, hang in there. 21, guilt offering, wave offering, grain offering. 22, sin offering, burnt offering. 24, guilt offering, wave offering. 25, guilt offering, guilt offering. It's in there twice. 28, end of the verse, guilt offering. 31, sin offering, burnt offering, grain offering. Now, here's what I want you to see. When you're looking at these passages, look at which offering it is, because it's going to tell you what God is going for. In other words, if the offering is a dedicatory, he's not dealing with sin. If the offering is a sin offering, he's not dealing with dedication, he's dealing with sin. So start imposing in your own mind what those offerings are about. Don't worry about, do I have grain, or is it, do I kill a ram or a lamb? Don't worry about that. Ask yourself, what is he going for here? So for instance, if he says in verses 1 to 4 that you go, the Lord said, this is the law of the leper in the day of his cleansing. This is graduation for I no longer have leprosy day. Okay? Verses 1 to 4. What's he do? Number 1, get qualified sources. The first thing he has to do is he's got to go get somebody who can check them out that has trustworthy evaluation. So the first 4 verses of chapter 14 are, you want to get out of being a leper? Find somebody who knows if you don't have leprosy anymore. Go to the right priest with the right standard that has a trustworthy evaluation. Now I'm going to stop here for a second. I'm coming back, but I just need you to see something. One of my concerns as a pastor, and I think I have it more now than I had it 10 years ago and 20 years ago and 30 years ago, is as I watch people coming through dealing with sin issues in their life, they are often going to people who have no objective standards from the Scripture at all. Do you know how many times I've had somebody walk in my office and say, well, yeah, I'm going to get a divorce, but I went to so-and-so and they told me it was okay. And I will sit down with them and I will say, talk to me about this. And I will find no biblical grounds for this at all, but they will come back and say, but they told me it was okay. And my point is, find a trustworthy source that has the ability to evaluate it by objective standards of the Word of God, or don't trust it. I don't want to hear you coming back and saying, well, I'm working in a ministry with these guys, and they don't really know the Bible, but they're really good at ministry. They're not good at ministry if they don't know God's Word. I'm serious, guys. This is a time for the serious people to step up and start doing this stuff. Now, in verses 5 to 7, one of the things I think that's missing, and it's missing desperately in the church, and I don't know how to deal with it, but you have to communicate clearly to everyone who's involved that the guy's clean. Let me suggest to you that a leper has just gone through a time when the best thing he could, the most profound thing he was saying was, unclean, unclean. Now, how do you get this guy back in society? How do you take him from the middle of his problem and not make him a ministry, but drop him back into society and make him whole again? How do you do that? And one of the things it says in verses 5, 6, and 7 is you got to get a public ceremony where everybody's on board that this guy has a clean bill of health. And I mean that literally, but I also mean it symbolically. Can you think of situations where that could apply in the church today? Where people have been through such experiences where for a while they were set aside or considered not eligible to participate, and now we need to make clear that they are back on the team. Is there something like that that you can think through? It is definitely true when somebody dies. You buried your loved one, but you were defiled for a time. It did not mean you were sinful. It meant you were ineligible to participate. Why? Needed time to breathe. Yeah, it's probably not the right time for you to be talking to anybody about anything or leading any ministries. We have this thing today where we think everybody can just shake it off in a millisecond and get right back to the work. That's not true. I have told you before that if I've committed one sin in this church, I know what it was. I buried good friends and went on with ministry the next day when I shouldn't have been in the pulpit. It did not escape my notice. I did it, and I shouldn't have. Fact of the matter is, we all need time to grieve. And you don't just bounce back. And what happened is it showed up 6 months later in my life when there was grief in my heart and I wasn't putting it in the right place. Okay, maybe somebody dies. But I'm thinking also, well, for one thing, let's go back to that divorced person. There are times when you are not the party that's the problem. So they walk out, they do something that is within the biblical text. How do we let the rest of the church know that this person has a clean bill of health? We fail to be able to do that, but it would help them dramatically. Because they're walking around with a cloud over them, the big D word kind of stuck on their head, when the fact of the matter is they might not have been wrong. Or I can think of any number of other situations where people walked away from God for a period of time. And they were kicked off of their ministries. And they came back and they repented and they got right with God. And not everybody needs to be involved in all the level of what they had done wrong or the repentance. But certainly there needs to be some public aspect to where we get everybody to clearly communicated that this person is fully back on the team. That's verses 5 through 7 for me. That's lepers get clean. That's no matter what you've been through, if God gets you through it, there should be a marker placed there that says this person has a clean bill of health. There's got to be a way to do that. I think we're pretty good at removing people. I just don't think we're that good at reinstalling them. And I think one of the problems we have in Christianity is that if we're going to treat the other person the way we ought to and handle their life the way we ought to, we need to communicate clearly that they are now back part of the community and not to be isolated from it. By the way, the first century church had this problem. They kicked out the guy Paul told them to, but Paul had to instruct them to take him back after he repented. Why? Because once they kicked him out, they got in the groove of isolating the guy, and now it's weird to now bring him back and, hug Harry and bring him back. They needed to do it. Okay, drop down to verses 8 and 9. One of the things that's weird about this is after he's cleansed, he doesn't come back fully into the camp. He comes in and he stays outside his tent for 7 days. That means he's in the camp but outside his tent. Why? In a way, they're easing him back into his normal position. In another way, the fact that he's back in the camp gives everybody the opportunity to see that the priest says he's one of us again. So people are walking up and, nice to see you there. Yeah, good to have you there. Nice, yeah, glad you're back, How you feeling? Feeling great. I'm on day 3, still sitting outside the tent. Can't wait to get in there. But there's an easing back into it, and the community is able to participate and allow the person to move back into active participation in the family. And what's interesting is in verses 10 and 11, but that doesn't mean there's not a day that's a fresh start. There is a marker for the time of fresh start. And what I see is in verses 10 and 11, he brings an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil and a grain offering and 1 log of oil, and the priest who pronounces him clean presents the man to be cleansed after the aforesaid before the Lord at the doorway of the tent of meeting. They come and literally bathe the man with oil standing in the doorway. Now, what does that tell you? That, first of all, the only way they can do it is touch him. And that tells you he's okay to touch, because the priest just did. And what they're saying is, they hug the guy first and then the rest of the community can. I'm using that metaphorically. But they throw their arms around the guy and say, he's part of us, and then everyone else can. What I think is interesting is he gets a fresh start, but guys, stop at verses 10 and 11, and would you make a note somewhere that he's not worthless? Somewhere they renew what they have to give to God. He brings an offering because he's not a nobody. He may have been a leper. He may be cleansed, but he has something to participate in the community and to walk with God. He's not worthless. He's something to God. And then verses 12 and 13. And then you see it again in verses 18 to 20. You see these guilt offerings, 12 and 13, guilt offering, burnt offering, guilt offering. 17, guilt offering, sin offering, burnt offering, here's what you see. You see that even in the process of his cleansing, that some consequences just don't go away. They actually have to do something to remove the consequences. Yeah, Meredith.
So they got these diseases because of a sin. It wasn't like, oh, I just contracted leprosy.
That was the classic Christian question.
Okay.
If I got the disease, it must be because of my sin. But no is the answer.
Because they're giving guilt offerings, which means there's guilt.
But there's two kinds. There's the kind that's the depravity kind, where I am before the Lord, I have evidently impacted, even unknowingly, something that violated God's holiness. Sometimes it's just that you lived next door to somebody who did. It wasn't your guilt. It was that the leaves of your neighbor's sin blew on your well-manicured life.
Is that why I have eczema?
Yeah, you could have eczema, and it could be just about somebody. First of all, it is because I live in a fallen world, and it might be because I contacted something. They didn't know bacteria, they didn't know virus, they didn't know disease. What they knew was God, which, by the way, is not a bad thing to know, because we know bacteria and virus and don't know God. So we've got doctors tracing it down like everything's in the test tube. And then there's miracles where people just shouldn't get better, and then they do. And that's why an awful lot of the people that I talk to in the hospitals actually walk around with a strong faith. Because they know they did everything they could, and then the person walked out and they have no idea why. What I would suggest to you is it's all of those things. Because there was guilt or violation did not mean I did it, or that I deliberately, I might have done it and didn't know I did. Maybe I contacted something, picked up something that it was on, but I didn't know. I can tell you this, when I'm sitting outside the camp, I'm going to have time to think about it and retrace my steps in my mind. I mean, you got to remember, these folks, they're not going that many places. The camp isn't moving that often. And one of the nice things about the desert, there's a lot of things that are not nice about the desert, but one of the nice things about the desert is no self-respecting bacteria or virus can live long in that environment. I mean, things die quickly there. So the bigger thing is, I would suggest to you that in Christianity, we always want to tag the person who pays the penalty with the sin. But God said very clearly, I pass the sins to the third and fourth generation under the law. And what he's saying is, that you got more than your nose from your parents. You also got some strong-willed tendencies and some, a whole list of other things. And very often the people I'm counseling that are alcoholics had parents that were alcoholics. We get more. So I can't quantify sin nature or depravity. If I'm going to quantify depravity, I'll just use the word total, okay? But I can't really quantify it. I can just tell you that you get more from your parents than just... I mean, some of you have specific issues of sin, willfulness and sin in your life that your parents can look right at you and go, yeah, I know all about that. You should have asked me 30 years ago. I could have told you all about that. And that's just true. One of the things Christianity is not good with is the nature side of the argument. We like behavior and nurture, but we're not good with nature. Let me suggest to you that the consequences don't always go away. Look at 14 to 17 for a minute. One of the things he says is that change in behavioral patterns needed to take place. So what does he do? He does this thing with the earlobe and the thumb and the toe, but it's not in blood. It's not a miluim. What's it done in? Oil, which is a representation of healing, not of atonement. With priests, it was a representation of atonement. With these guys, it's a representation of healing. And so this is the process that was done on the consecration of a priest, but it was done by means of oil and not by blood. And it reminded the person that their ears and their hands and their feet were also dedicated to the Lord. But it also, I think, brought them back to where did I go? What did I touch? What was I involved in that could have brought about this? I think that's part of the whole diagnosing and the whole cleansing process. It's interesting because that guilt offering was very much a part of it. Now, last part, and then we can get out of this, is in verses 21 to 32. 21 to 32, I didn't skip. I actually jumped around a little bit, but 21 to 32 is nobody gets blacklisted forever. Nobody gets blacklisted forever. That there's an allowance and a process to make people able to come back. God is not in the business of trying to find ways to disenfranchise his people. That's not what he's trying to do. Now, this is a tough one because sometimes people are going to have whole homes that needed to be dealt with. So can I say 14:33 to 57? 14:33 to 57 is cleansing a home. And now you get into the actual process of declaring a home clean or unclean. That's 14:33 to 57, okay? 14:33 to 57, cleansing a home. And here's the thing. Now they got a problem, and the problem is they got tents. And so it's not, we could talk about this as mold on plaster, but this is a whole different deal. These people are living in tents, and the mold not dealt with on this tent is going to communicate with that tent and the other tent, and they're all going to have mold, and you're going to throw away all your goat hair tents. There's a limited amount of goat hair every year that goats can grow. And so what you're going to have, a single goat hair tent is somewhere around 230 goats. Okay, 230 goats to get a goat hair tent over you if you've got a standard size tent. If you got one the tabernacle size, that was 540 goats. It cost me 540 goats shearing to get enough to make the tabernacle. And my point is, this is expensive. And so what you do is you build them in rows, in weaving rows, and you cut out any parts that would have any kind of infection. I'm not going to go through all of the specifics of the cleaning of a home. I'm going to stop here and take a look at, I want to just go through now and mark off, and we're going to come back Tuesday and go through the line items, okay? I want you to mark in your text that 14:33 to 57 is cleansing a home. If you already did that, we're going to come back to that. Then I want you to go to the chapter 15 and mark this down. These are laws of discharges. Laws of discharges. Both male and female discharges. We're going to talk about defilement. Somewhere near chapter 15, I want you to write the word defilement equals ineligible. And I know somebody's going to ask me. Is it one L or two? Anybody know?
One.
Okay. Like I said, it's one L. Okay. Defilement is ineligible. In other words, you can be made ineligible and not have sinned. When you bury your parents, you're not sinning, but you're defiled. It means benched. And so in the Bible, some people sin and therefore are defiled. Some are defiled because they live in a sinful world. It's not anything they did. They didn't do anything wrong, but they are benched for a time. So we're going to see that God literally turns on and off various spigots and discharges, and it makes you ineligible. And you didn't do anything. You don't go to the service because you're ineligible to be there. Well, what if I have Sabbath school? Too bad. You're not going to be there. And so we're going to go through in chapter 15, discharges and defilements. I want you to go to 16. And while he's dealing with blood and defilements, he goes to the law of atonement. And one of the permanent laws is there. It's actually in this section. This is laws of atonement, how to turn God's head away from wrath. To abate wrath means to make his head turn away. In the Hebrew Scriptures, the sacrifices cause God to turn his face away in wrath. You don't have that anymore. All of you after Hebrews 9, you don't have that anymore. You are now standing in the presence of God, and what he sees is not you. He sees the sacrifice of Jesus in front of you. So, Zoe, to God, you look just like Jesus. But so does Rebecca. So does Dennis. So don't get a big head, because Jonathan does too. Okay? The point is God looks at you, but he sees Jesus. That's the way it's done now. But back then, this was done by turning God's head. He smelled the sacrifice and turned his head away from penalizing you for what you have done. All right, 17, laws of blood. We're going to come through and do all these. I'm going to stop now and go to 18, and that's where we're actually going to close out our time. And laws for 18 pick up one of the Al-Shams. It is human sexuality. So I want to stop there, and I want to talk about laws of sexual relationship. Okay? And then I'm going to come in and I'll backfill all the things that we skipped. I was supposed to get this far tonight. I didn't because I wasn't disciplined. It wasn't you, it was me. Okay, go to 18:1. Lord spoke to Moses saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God." Stop there. Sex laws in the Levitical criminal code of law are under I am the Lord your God. The standard is not what a preponderance of experts think is good for you or what's psychologically healthy. It's I am the Lord your God. I make the rules. And then he said this, "You shall not do what is done in the land of Egypt." In other words, the standard of sexuality will not be determined by the best minds of medicine that existed in the world that day, which were in Egypt. That's not where you get your information, where you live. Nor are they to do what is done in the land of Canaan, which is one of the most forward-thinking and progressive groups ever, the Canaanites. Before they got wiped out, they were really on the cutting edge. Then they fell off. "You shall not walk in their statutes." In other words, don't mimic the world's standards. That's what the point of verse 3 is. Then, verse 4, "You are to perform my judgments and keep my statutes to live in accord with them. I am the Lord your God." In other words, where verse 3 says, do not mimic the world, verse 4 says, mimic exactly my statutes. Do exactly what I tell you. Verse 5, "So shall you keep my statutes and my judgments by which a man may live if he does them. I am the Lord." Let me just give you 3 words. They bring life. Following God's standards of sexuality ensures and brings life. And then it says, verse 6, "None of you shall approach any blood relative of his to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord." So, in other words, part of the separation law was you were to be separated by families in sexuality. There was not to be sexual relationships by people of the same bloodlines. Verse 7, "You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father. That is the nakedness of your mother." What is he saying? Sounds like a lawyer.
Don't have sex with them.
Okay, but when you do, that belongs to the other person that's inside that circle. In other words, when you violate one part of the couple, you violate the other part. That's why you don't belong there. The circle of your sexuality is that man and that woman only. No one else gets in. So if you're in there, it means you're violating both parties, not one. That's not small, because what he's saying is the violation is multiple violations. That means when you're thinking in offering terms, you're going to have a separate set of offerings for the man than you are for the woman if you were going to try to make this right, if you could buy your way out of making it right in redemption. Let me say it this way. It's a big thing. You're messing up a lot of people's lives. Then he says, "She is your mother. You are not to uncover her nakedness." By the way, that's a question of honor. You can't honor your father or mother and act like one who would mock a father who is naked in his tent. A Noah story, right? Honor means that you cover over. You don't mock. Verse 8, "You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness." That is not a question of honor. That's a question of covenant identification. They have covenanted together and made a vow, and you're in the wrong place. Now, he goes on and he says, "The nakedness of your sister, either your father's daughter or your mother's daughter, whether born at home or born outside, their nakedness you shall not uncover." That has to do with half brothers and half sisters because they had polygamous marriages. So it says that that's off limits to you because the bloodline of one or the other is involved there. I mentioned this morning in a message that there's a group of people in the Ethics Council in Germany that wants to do away with these laws. These laws came from the biblical world and were far beyond what anyone in that society would have been able to judge on the basis of their microscopes that they didn't have. So in reality, God was protecting and bringing life through these laws. Keep going. The nakedness of your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter, the nakedness you shall not uncover, for their nakedness is yours. There is also a case to be made that nephews, nieces, that they're supposed to be a protected place. Your home is supposed to be a place where you are protected, where the boundaries are clear, that violation of those boundaries brings a swift and severe penalty so that everybody can rest in the home. So that everybody knows what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. 10 generations of slaves, they're not going to know. So God's going to say, let me just make it clear. I don't care what the Egyptians did. I don't care what the Canaanites do. I'm not interested in what the world standard is here. This is the way I divide things. Do it this way. And then he says verse 11, the nakedness of your father's wife, your father's wife's daughter, born to your father, she is your sister. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. She is your father's blood relative, your aunt. The point is, you need to know who's a cousin, who's an aunt. God is literally establishing who people are in your family. That's what he's doing here. It's not a mystery. You are all the way 18 chapters into Leviticus, and this has never been spelled out. People they didn't necessarily know. This is the circle of how far out. You cannot marry within this circle. So God specified it. He said in verse 13, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, for she is your mother's blood relative, your aunt. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. You shall not approach his wife. She is your aunt. So your uncle and your aunt, even if she's not related to you because she belongs to your uncle. That's a different situation. Verse 15, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. This is a covenant violation. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It's your brother's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and of her daughter, nor shall you take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. They are blood relatives. Now stop and look at the next word. It is lewdness. The word translates as disgusting to God. In other words, I don't like it. I want to make something clear. What God calls disgusting in the Hebrew Scriptures did not suddenly become tasteful in the New Testament. He doesn't have to say it again. And for the person who's running around going, well, Jesus never said that, Jesus was here. The eternal Son of God with promise was here. These are his standards as well for the people of Israel. And he said, you shall not marry a woman in addition to her sister as a rival while she is alive to uncover her nakedness. In other words, don't marry two living sisters at the same time in a polygamous situation. I cannot imagine who would think that would be a good idea. I can't for the life of me imagine why anybody would try that. But nevertheless, it was just plain wrong. Also, you shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness during her menstrual impurity. This has to do with probably more than anything else a control issue on his part. That is, that there are inappropriate times, and she is defiled during that period, meaning ineligible for certain activities. And if she's ineligible for activities for the Lord, she's going to be ineligible for activities for you, gentlemen, and so control yourself. Verse 20, you shall not have intercourse with your neighbor's wife to be defiled with her. This is an adultery standard. You shall not give any of your offspring to offer them to Molech, nor shall you profane the name of the Lord your God. I am the Lord. The god Molech in the earlier days was temple prostitution. It probably was related to temple prostitution. We're going to find out in Jeremiah 7 and Jeremiah 32 about Molech. He's also a god that takes baby sacrifices. They killed babies for Molech. And so we'll deal more with that when we get into Jeremiah. But for the sake of this right here, what I need you to see is this. Stay away from temple prostitution. Just stay away from it. You shall not lie with a male as one lies with a female. It is an abomination. In other words, homosexuality, two males together. The word abomination is the single strongest word in the Hebrew language for God's aversion. I point this out to you only to say this. It's really there. We're not making it up. I'm not running around trying to kill the love of two people. I'm trying to tell you that God says It's his strongest word, abomination. There isn't a stronger word he could say. It's not like he kind of dislikes it. I'm not trying to be hard. I'm trying to be biblical. And he says, I don't care what the world says. It's an abomination to me. Also, you shall not have intercourse with an animal. Would you please understand that homosexuality is linked grammatically in the passage with bestiality? Do not defile yourselves by any of these things, for by all these the nations which I am casting out before you have become defiled. Here's what he says. Nations that go down this path, he just plain removes. Do what you want, but it'll destroy your country. And then he goes and says, for the land has become defiled, therefore I have brought its punishment upon it, so that the land has spewed out its inhabitants. The Bible makes the point that the land itself suffers when people allow these kinds of things to go on. Luke?
Is that the same defiled? That's not the same defiled as when a person was defiled.
The issue with the word defilement is sometimes it means ineligible and sometimes it means absolutely ridiculously sinful. But it's a whole range. What I don't want you to do is say, because it's defiled, somebody sinned. No, because it's defiled just means it came from a sinful world. Or it could mean it's defiled because it's absolutely the wrong thing to do. I'm not trying to get you from never going to defiled equals sin. I'm saying don't force the switch there. It may not be there, is what I'm trying to do. So it's not a grammatical difference. It's a usage difference. You have to ask yourself, is he saying he's disgusted with this? Or is he saying you're ineligible to participate during this time? And that's the whole range of that word, okay? So it's going to take a little bit of work for you to do that. We're almost done. I'll get you out of here on time. Verse 26, but as for you, you are to keep my statutes, my judgments, and shall not do any of these abominations, neither the native nor the alien who sojourns among you. In other words, when you come into the land and you make the laws so that everybody lives under these sexual statutes. Does everybody understand why that makes sense? You can't have one wild card running around going, yeah, but I can marry my sister. You can't have anybody do it. You got to actually put up lines and say, this is just wrong and nobody's going to do it. Now stop right there and ask yourself, how does this work in a world that thinks I shouldn't be allowed to make the rules? I'm somehow, if I don't tolerate what they want to do, I'm not being fair. All I'm going to tell you is that our forefathers came onto this land for the religious freedom to actually stand on certain principles of purity. And removing them is not going to help the nation. It's going to plunge us into a terrible state. I would argue that it already is. And so it says this, verse 28, so that the land will not spew you out, should you defile it, as it has spewed out the nation which has been before you. For whoever does any of these abominations, those persons who do so shall be cut off from among their people. Thus you are to keep my charge that you do not practice any of the abominable customs which have been practiced before you, so as to not defile yourselves with them. Why? It is rooted in my authority. I am the Lord your God. And in reality, what he tries to say is this. I want you to understand that the principles of human sexuality are not based on the best science of our day or the best psychology. They're not based on the cultures. The laws, the rules, the baseline for this is I am the Lord and I created you. I know what'll kill you. Listen to me.